Hello, welcome to Friday Formula, a weekly podcast where this week we're hoping to make recording without getting the episode deleted for exceeding track limits. I'm Owen Bellwood. Once again, I'm joined by Will Longman. How are you doing this week, Will?
Oh, good. That works because it's like an audio track. That's very clever.
Yeah, it's like double meaning. Everyone's happy.
I'm good. The most exciting thing that's happened to me this week was my nan asked me what a podcast was because she'd heard someone talk about it on the news.
And be like, this is.
I really did not want to confuse her because she wanted to ask me the week before but forgot the word podcast. So if I'd have gone, yeah, I've got one, why don't you listen to it on Spotify, like and subscribe? I think that would have really just gone over the edge. But yeah, unfortunately, that was the most exciting thing that happened to me this week because the rest of it was spent watching the Portuguese Grand Prix.
Yeah, it definitely was not as exciting as we're so far used to this year, was it?
No, I mean, you actually did stuff with your weekend, which meant you kind of reclaimed some of that time back, didn't you?
Yeah, so I had quite a hectic weekend and ended up watching the highlights on Channel 4 in the evening. And it seemed like there was just as much in their hour-long highlights programme as in the 5-minute one that Formula One put up on YouTube. There wasn't a whole heap of action. Even though it wasn't the most action-packed event, we've managed to pick out 5 talking points from the course of the Portimao race, and we're going to talk through those now. And we are going to kick off with the fact that it was quite a dull one.
There was some action. I mean, there was the safety car at the beginning where Kimi Räikkönen made the cardinal sin of just ramming his teammate. And it's not often
distracted by a switch.
Yeah, he said that in the interview, didn't he? He's getting old, clearly. It's not often you see Kimi Räikkönen make a mistake, but having a crash because you were sorting the radio out is a little bit senile. No, but he admitted it was his mistake and straight away, which was good of him. A real shame that it was on his teammate, but at least Antonio didn't get a puncture.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I mean, for a race that had a lot of overtakes, it wasn't very exciting.
No, and if you think back to the race we had there last year, which seemed really unpredictable, really exciting, and like we had Carlos Sainz leading at one point, whereas this year it was a lot more kind of by the book, and it was the same top 3 in qualifying, and then it was the same 3 on the podium. There wasn't too much unpredictability. Like you said, there was a few interesting moments, like starting with qualifying. It was nice to see Vettel up in Q3 for the first time this year.
Yes, I think the first time since midway through I think the Styrian Grand Prix last year or something ridiculous.
Yeah, that was a nice change in fortunes for him. It was good. And then also I wrote down that Ocon seemed to have an excellent qualifying as well. So that sort of built it up to be quite an exciting little spicy race. But unfortunately, when it came to the weekend, unfortunately when it came to Sunday, Vettel ended up falling down the pack. The Alpines had a few nice moments, but there wasn't really anything to mix things up.
Yeah, and even the opposite of that with the shock, and it was really a shock of Daniel Ricciardo going out in Q1. You expected to see him make his way back up the pack, and he did, but it still felt like an unsensational drive to get back up to 9th place where he finished. I think personally it's because of the enormous straight. The cars don't necessarily have particularly low downforce setups for this race, but when you plonk a massive straight like that, it's the only place they're going to overtake. And that kind of was true. And they added a second DRS zone, and that was the only other place there were really any overtakes, which was a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it was a lot of it was a lot of DRS assisted overtakes on the straight, and then sometimes into the corner as well. But it's sort of
Yeah.
bit, oh, he's got past him, oh, we'll get past him again next lap.
Yeah, and similarly, I think when you have a race like this where there are a lot of back markers and I had the driver tracker on at one point, and there were just cars everywhere, and it makes you realise that like you might see a gap that's closing down, and you think, oh, that might get a bit tasty. What's happened there? And it's just because the car in front's got stuck behind traffic, and that doesn't resolve itself. Like it just becomes more boring because they've all got to navigate the traffic, and well, no one wants to see that. An incident like what happened with Mazepin and Perez. God.
No, that was quite a scary moment when he seemingly turned in on him without realising he was there. But
well, at least he's got his first points in Formula One. They're penalty points, but he's got his first points. So if you were going to rate this race out of 5, so like give it a star rating, where would it come?
Am I allowed half stars, or are you a stickler for stars only?
If I wanted half stars, I would have said rate it out of 10.
Okay. I'd probably go with a 2.
Yeah.
It wasn't awful. There were still overtakes, and people like Lando Norris had some nice little battles, and then it was great to see the Alpines, both of them up in the points. But it was quite uneventful. It was like everyone sort of finished where you expected them to.
Yeah.
So that was nice to see. There weren't any major crashes and disasters and things, but it was just like, it was like standard.
It was a little bit like one of those videos. This is going to be a weird analogy, but you see those videos where someone's got like a drawer of nails and they're all higgledy-piggledy, and then they just shake the drawer and order comes out and they all end up straight. It was like that. Like there was a little bit of mayhem in qualifying where some cars were out of position, but then you stick them on the track for 66 laps and they did just sort themselves out and get to where you'd expect them to be. Good for someone like Ricciardo, bad for someone like Ocon or Russell, who smashed qualifying.
Yeah, that was quite a surprise to see him finish 11th in qualifying, which was his highest start for Williams today, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, it was his best qualifying. A shame Nicholas didn't get through to Q2 this week. But George was saying that they were doing really well and were really pacey when the wind was low. And then it was just awful when it picked up, which is a shame because there's clearly something in that car that could get points this year. And everyone, I think, is egging them on to try and get them. Yeah.
It was a shame with Williams and Russell's result, and then Aston Martin as well, with Vettel making it into Q3. Both of those seemed to have the one lap pace that could get them a decent position, but then in race pace just seemed to struggle a bit. And whereas people like Ricciardo were finding their way through the field, and the Ferraris a little bit as well, the Aston were just slowly dropping down the order.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's half credit to the other cars as well. Like, there was some good radio from Alonso where he was overtaking. I think he overtook one Aston Martin and was like, right, who's next? And it was nice to see him get a little bit feisty. But again, actually, we didn't really see much of that when we watched it on telly. It's all in the highlights. It very much focused on the top 3 battle, which rightly so they should have, but it wasn't necessarily the most exciting battle for like half of the race.
It started in qualifying again with Bottas securing pole, which I don't think too many people would have predicted going into the weekend with how close Max and Lewis have been.
No, and it's nice to have 3 different pole sitters in 3 different races. And see him really redeem himself from last week where he was absolutely awful.
You tell him.
But I think well, he was, wasn't he? I think we saw it a couple of times last year with Bottas as well, where in the first run in Q3 he does a decent lap and might be faster than Hamilton, and then Hamilton brings it out the bag for the second run and takes pole, and like Max catches up. But that didn't happen this week because the wind seemingly must have picked up for the second runs in Q3, and no one went faster, and he managed to bag himself pole position.
Yeah, he was kind of aided a little bit by Max did set the faster time initially, but then it got deleted because of the track limits, which we'll come on to a little bit later on. But that did kind of set it up for what we thought was going to be an exciting start, because obviously Max and Lewis are leading the championship at the moment. They're both going to want to get past Bottas in the first lap, but neither of them did, and they just sort of stayed behind him for a while. And it wasn't really until we had the safety car restart where we got any excitement with the top three.
No, it wasn't until lap 7 when Max got in front of Lewis, which I think that was just after the safety car, wasn't it? And then they swapped again. I think Hamilton got back in front of him a few laps later. And Valtteri looked pretty strong for like the opening 20 laps before Lewis got in front of him. Max pounced on a Bottas mistake and got past him, which was nice. And it was a bit of a brave overtake as well.
Just after they'd both pitted for new tyres as well, wasn't it? So Max got the undercut pretty much so that he had temperature in his tyres, so that when Valtteri came out of the pits, he was a lot more prepared to pounce on any mistakes.
I think Red Bull are always going to be the ones to push the pit strategy this year. I think they're going to be in the driving seat with that kind of stuff because they always seem to be the ones that try something a little bit different. Especially, we'll get onto Perez later, but what they did with him was, or set him up for what was an incredible race. The result wasn't really astonishing, but he had a brilliant race when you put it into context. But in terms of the top three, it would be nice, I guess, for it to become a top 4 in the next few weeks and see if Valtteri can hold on to that third spot. It seems like Lewis is settling down into like this championship fight a little bit more, getting a little bit more relaxed. Equally, it seems like Sergio Perez is getting a little bit more relaxed in his second driver role at Red Bull because he had an interesting race.
Yeah, and that was the next point that we're going to pick out to talk a little bit more about, because everyone was quite excited to see what Perez could do in the Red Bull, and I don't think the last 2 races we quite saw his full potential. So he seemed a lot more comfortable and a lot more at home in the car this week. He qualified 4th, and although Max had his time qualifying, he was just 1/10 of a second off his teammate when it came to forming the grid, which was pretty great to see how close they were.
Yeah, I mean, you could even argue Perez was even a little bit disappointed that he wasn't closer after what happened last week in Imola, where he out-qualified Max. But it's nice to see that, it's not just a one-off weekend. It's so difficult talking about whoever's in that second Red Bull seat because you don't want to jinx it.
No. Yeah, they're doing great. And then crash out the next 4 races running. Exactly,
and then you're just going to think it's all our fault. But no, it was nice to see him. It was nice to see 2 Red Bulls on the second row, I guess, like where they should be, which is weird. But like the last 2 seasons, that just hasn't happened.
No, it came kind of more possibility of them being able to attack the Mercedes and mix up the strategies to try and split the 2 of them up, and it more to play with on track. When it came to the start of the race, Perez had a few little wobbles, so he kind of lost a position to Lando Norris in the McLaren and ended up having a few little dicey battles with people like Carlos Sainz as well. But it was his strategy in the end that helped him climb back up to 4th, and pretty much he was kind of out on his own in 4th for a little while towards the end, wasn't he?
Yeah. I think the whole battle at the beginning with Lando was maybe just down to him being on the mediums and Lando being the first runner on the softs. So not that it was expected that he was going to lose the place, but it was always going to be harder for him than it was for the 3 in front of him. But then if he falls behind Lando, he's got more work to do to catch up, and that pack's just going to drive away into the distance, and it kind of ruins his race a little bit. But yeah, he ended up doing a monumental stint on those mediums, didn't he?
52 laps before he finally pitted.
Crazy. Yeah, to the extent where Lewis was calling for blue flags when he came up to overtake him.
Yeah, I did think that was quite funny. He was like, why are there no blue flags? No, Lewis, you are racing.
But I know it's not the circuit for it to happen, but had there been a red flag, Perez is on to win the race. That would have been incredible.
Yeah, he could have really, if there'd been a late safety car or something, he could have really just walked away with all of that huge advantage. He ended up pitting later on.
Let's be thankful for what we've got. We've got a Red Bull driver picking up 10 points. That's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Fourth place was a nice solid result for him. Picked up the points, like you say, Red Bull needed. But he's definitely showing that he's a lot more comfortable and that there's definitely more to come from the second Red Bull seat this year.
Yeah, and it's not even the fact that, he had a decent race. It was also the fact that this is the role that car should be playing. Essentially, they left him out so that he could try and hold up Lewis for a couple of laps. In the end, that was never going to happen. But at least he was in that position, and like you said, gave him the opportunity to try something different. And that's something that we've just not seen from Alex or Pierre in the past. Alex finished 12th in last year's Portuguese Grand Prix, and he qualified in 6th behind Sergio Perez in the Racing Point. So I guess that's a prime example where you can compare the two and see how they're pulling off that role or not.
So another major talking point of the Portuguese Grand Prix this year was track limits and drivers exceeding, which was something we saw quite a lot last year and quite a lot of the last few races. And I think everyone's beginning to get a bit tired of it, but it was back with a vengeance from Friday and the end of the race, pretty much.
Yeah, I don't mind track limits, but I don't want to get to the point where Max is having an interview thinking he's got the fastest lap point, being told it's been deleted, and then him disagreeing with it because there weren't track limits that corner. Again, they're rules that should just be stuck to and consistent. They were clearly watching them because Yuki Tsunoda had 2 track limit warnings by lap 3.
Yeah, supposedly it was turns 1, 5 and 15. They were the ones that the stewards were going to keep an eye on. And I read a WTF1 article that said 65 times were deleted just in Friday's practice. Which is insane.
Yeah, I guess practice is where you want them to be deleted though, isn't it, and find that limit.
Yeah, you don't want it to be when Max Verstappen set in the fastest lap in Q3 and then it gets deleted.
Yeah. All I can say is roll on Monaco.
It's just a wall. I kind of feel like it is going to be something that recurs throughout the year, everywhere except Monaco by the sounds of it.
Yeah. I just think it needs to be. I think we've had this conversation before, but it needs to be a lot more clear cut. Let's just have, if your 4 wheels go outside the white line at any point, your time's been deleted. That's it. None of this but the red and white curb is involved. If both your wheels go on the red and white curb, you're not on the track. Delete it. It's done. It's over.
It should be all corners rather than just 1, 5 and 15, because why is it different at those corners compared to turn 4?
Yeah. And I don't think the drivers on their track walk should be calculating their lines based on, all right, I've got to be in the white line here, but actually how far can I push to get both my wheels just touching the red and white curve, like here, like it doesn't make any sense.
No.
The circuits have been designed with every corner being a specific challenge, and Tilke isn't sat there designing these circuits thinking, oh well, the curve that they put in there is the perfect addition to this track. Just get rid of it. I hate it.
And I understand the whole element of pushing the car to the limit and being right on the edge. So maybe every now and then you slip out a little bit, but when it's drivers taking this wider line so that they can stay on the power longer, it shouldn't be allowed, and it should be policed, but it needs to be policed consistently and in the same manner at every circuit. Like if they're saying it's the red and white curbs, it's always got to be the red and white curbs. If they're saying it's the white line, it's always got to be the white line. Stop making it confusing. It's a line.
Yeah. And we're on race 3, and that's 7 points now that have had a controversial track limits decision, and that's just for like the top points playing positions. We've had Max have to give back 6 points effectively to Lewis in Bahrain, and then we've had him lose one on fastest lap, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but 7 points over the course of 3 races lost by Verstappen essentially would have put him way above Lewis. And if that carries on happening, and I'm not saying it's going to carry on happening to Max every race, but that's a lot of points that are going to be decided based on arbitrary rules that change from race to race. And you do not want to be at a title deciding race where you have the same kind of incident that you had or here or at Bahrain. Should we talk about something a little bit more fun, less controversial?
Are you saying Haas are less controversial?
I'm saying Mick Schumacher is less controversial. That's very much a tale of two garages.
Yeah, the final point we made on this year's Portuguese Grand Prix is that Mick Schumacher finally overtook someone, and he finished in 17th, and it was brilliant to see. I think everyone was pretty happy with it, apart from one person.
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit surprised he didn't get driver of the day, because throughout almost the entirety of the second half of the race, he was within a second of Latifi, and it seemed like such a difficult race to follow someone at, and he managed it, and he forced Latifi into the mistake, and there's progress. There's real progress there. Yeah,
and it was kind of nice that it wasn't, like we said earlier on, all the other overtakes seemed to just be DRS, DRS, DRS. So for him to be lap after lap staying so close behind Latifi, so that then as soon as he made that mistake and ran that little bit wider, Mick was ready to pounce and have him, basically.
Yeah, and hopefully it's the first. It will be the first of many. Let's hope as well that it's a sign that the guys at Banbury are actually pushing that car forward and maybe finding a little bit of pace, because I know they're focusing on their 2022 car, but it'll be nice for them to be a little bit more competitive this year.
Yeah, like no one's expecting them to get points and things, but it'd be nice to see them racing with realistically, it's going to be the Alfa Romeos and the Williams that are towards the back. So it's nice to see that this is the first, and hopefully there'll be more. The other side of the Haas garage, though, was 1 minute slower, I think, by the end of the race, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, the interval to Latifi was 1 minute and 4 seconds. Which is not fantastic.
No.
His fastest lap was half a second slower than Latifi as well.
Yeah, and in qualifying, Mazepin was like 0.6 of a second off Mick Schumacher as well.
But I'd be interested to see a long circuit, maybe like Singapore, what happens. Hopefully he's up to speed by then, but what up to speed actually means in his case will remain to be seen.
Yeah, especially after he claimed that he was going to do all his talking on the track.
Yeah.
Behind his teammate.
Well, I think what was nice, and something that might be nice to focus on, was FP1 saw Callum Ilott in the car for Alfa Romeo in place of Giovinazzi. And we were hoping that he might take one of the seats that was vacant at the end of last year. It wasn't to be. It'd be nice to see him take that Alfa Romeo seat next year. I think I've made my feelings clear on Antonio Giovinazzi in the past, but I've also made my feelings clear about Kimi Räikkönen being a little bit old. So
you're just not a fan of that team, really, are you?
I know, I love them.
Yeah, that's what they're going to be next year anyway.
Is it?
Suppose. Well, they did. But yeah, to bring it back to Mick Schumacher, obviously he made his move on Latifi, and while at Imola we heard his engineer coaxing him back in and being like, "Don't worry, you've got this. Keep your head down." His engineer came over and was like, "Great job, that's how it's done. Keep up the good work," which is really nice to see. And it's like the complete opposite of what we saw with Grosjean and co last year, when it was like, "Why can't you do better?"
Yeah.
So, whereas everyone was a bit worried about, obviously walking into Haas where they've said, we're not going to develop the car, like how good an environment is that going to be for a young driver? But it seems like, in Mick's case, they really stepped up to the plate and they're making sure that he feels at home in the team and in the sport, which is exactly what you need in your first year. So to see him overtake someone on his third race, hopefully we'll see a little bit more of that and him just get slowly up to speed and more comfortable and at home in the sport.
Be interesting to see if the dynamic at Haas has changed when it comes to Series 4 of Drive to Survive, because I don't know how they're going to be able to edit good guy Gunther Steiner after the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one.
That was our Portuguese Grand Prix review. Thank you very much for watching. You can like this video and subscribe to get our next video, which will be a review of the Spanish Grand Prix. In the meantime, you can head over to Twitter and follow us there, and get your fantasy team in order and get the code in the description of this video and join our league, to which there are 3 people currently, and the 2 presenters of this show are not leading. So that tells you all you need to know about the expertise of the Friday Formula duo. But yeah, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.